Now we can focus on the different countries. Firstly, Croatia. Professor Cepulo, the floor is yours.
My paper is quite complicated, factual burned, but I opted for conceptual presentation, so it will be very simple and very concept concentrated. And I will speak about state symbols, national symbols. I will concentrate mostly on national symbols, most controversial, and symbols of national minorities and religious communities in Croatia. History is quite important for Croatia, but I will be very brief. Croatia was a medieval state, then it enjoyed autonomy in the frame of the Hungarian kingdom with its own, well, so to say, constitutional rules and code of arms. And through controversial 20th centuries, finally became the state of its own in 1991. So these are the symbols. We will skip it over and speak about today. I will first speak about the concept of the state symbols in general, relevant for this paper, the concept of national symbols and national minorities and religious communities. So the state symbols are most easily to define. These are the they are defined by law, or they enjoy respective constitutional legal provisions by the legislation. National symbols is of course a challenge. So the national symbols, the point of the national symbols, what is the nation? The nation, in the nation state that as it emerged in the West Europe is community of citizens that we just heard about, political nation. But I think this does not go for this region, Central Europe, because nations in this region emerged before their states as part of the empires. So they constituted as nations before the state. Nation building took part before the state building. So when the state building when the states were constituted, they were constituted as states of particular nations. So the nations in this sense means a constituent nation that kind is a principle in the state. The rest of the nations at that territory, the nations, they became national minorities. So they are all nations, but one of them turned out to be constituent. This is well presented in Croatian Constitution 1990, which paraphrased Communist Constitution of Croatia 1974. Croatia is the national state of the Croatian people, the nation, the state of members of autochthonous national minorities, 22 of them enumerated, and its other citizens who are granted equality with citizens of the Croatian nationality. This is not in accordance with normative part, which provides for that power belongs to the people as the community of free and equal citizens. So civic, civic nation. But is in compliance with Article 10 that oblige Croatia to take special care and protection of parts of the Croatian people in other states. This is complementary to the most of other constitutions of former Yugoslav republics and Kosovo, not Kosovo. Very similar formulation in the Constitution of Northern Macedonia, national state of Macedonian people, and complementary definition in Constitution of Serbia and Slovenia, not quite explicit, but distinguish Serbian people and Slovenian people from the others. Multi-ethnic state of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is not the nation state, but multi-ethnic state, still inherited this communist heritage, speaks explicitly about constituent peoples. Bosnia, Serbs, Croatians. So Kosovo and Montenegro have the only civic constitutions. So in my approach, nation is Croatian nation in Croatia, and national symbols are Croatian symbols of the Croatian people. This is not in accordance with legal language, because Croatian legislation, when it speaks about national, speaks in civic meaning. So National Agency for Education, national pension, national subsidies, and so on, not in ethnocultural sense. But still, I believe this is the essential. Symbols of national minorities are also rather easy to define. Those are the symbols that are defined by autonomous bodies of national minorities according to regular procedure, plus de facto symbols of national minorities as nations, per analogiam, but with different positions. And symbols of religious communities, a matter of tradition and religious autonomy. Now, state symbols of Croatia. The Constitution speaks about explicitly coat of arms, flag, and anthem. And there is the law on the coat of arms, flag, and anthem of the Republic of Croatia, and on the flag and sash of the President of the Republic of Croatia, whether detailed, developed, and so on. Because of certain legal arguments, I would say that the flag of the President and the sash especially are not the state symbols, but just coat of arms, flag, and anthem. Plus, because of particular treatment in legislation, the name of the state, because the name of the state is protected and in one case is implicitly proclaimed as symbol of the state. This regulation is sufficiently developed, comparing through the history, far the most than all those entities before. So Croatia is the state from 1991, the Constitution 1990. But it's peculiar, you will see later on why it's a bit strange, that the new criminal code lowered the sanction for offending the reputation of the Republic of Croatia. Previously, 1997, it was 3 years of imprisonment. Now it's 1 year. So does the nation turn to be valid 3 times less than before? Now to more complicated issue of Croatian national symbols. I first identified, Croatian historian Budak, who identified elements of the Croatian national identity, Croatian language, Latin script, Christian faith, especially Catholicism, millennial culture, and tradition of the state with autonomy. You can associate each of these elements with certain symbol. Language is particularly important, more important than in the other states, because it's that famous dilemma about 1 or 2 languages, Serbo-Croatian or Serbian, or Croatian and Serbian. In Croatian perspective, it's 2 languages. From the perspective of Vuksanović Karadžić, it's 1 language for 1 nation. And in 19th century, it was linguistic debate primarily. In 20th century, it was very politically a sensible question. And that resulted with dissatisfaction on the Croatian side that complained on the Serbization of the Croatian culture. I stress this because we will be able to do it later on. Latin script, that is provided by the Constitution, and Catholicism, well, I could not identify it. Well, these 2 first are the symbols by itself, the language and the script. The Catholicism has a lot of symbols, but which one of them is national symbols? It's impossible to determine, so it depends about the context. Millennial culture, well, partly mythical, that is associated with wickerwork pattern that was extensively used in medieval Croatian state. And the traditional statehood and autonomy, you can identify medieval Croatian diet, Croatian bond, and perhaps building associated with them. To this, I would also add as the symbol name of the state, unofficial versions of coat of arms, flag, and anthem, and cultural artifacts, depending upon the context. I will not, theoretically yes, but I will not associate, attribute national symbolism to any of natural beauties, animals, flowers, and so on. Theoretically yes, but no. Why? Because none of them embodies Croatian tradition. Like, for example, Thingvellir in Iceland, a rocky seat of the Icelandic parliament. No such natural beauties that is also part of the Croatian history. So I would say no. So about legal protection. Language, why I stress language? Because the dissolution of Croatia with Yugoslavia resulted with particularly a kind of chaotic practice in language. Language was archaized, neologized, in order to make to distinguish more with Serbian culture. In 90s, it was quite a chaotic practice. And there was a proposal for radical language reform that would make it even more distinct from Serbian, that would stress its specificities. But it was not accepted. The government said, even though it was kind of nationalistic government, no radical reforms. And we still have two streams of philologists. One is pleading for codification of language. The other was against it. And this stream that plead for codification can hardly win. It's hard to imagine that a language will be codified. And this is something that you would not expect. After all this turmoil, dissatisfaction through the history, we finally have the state. We should have the state of our own, our language of our own. You would expect codification. No codification. Constitution provides for Croatian language and language script, but yes, okay, we are told that. What happened with language practice? The public decreased interest in that. The 90s, the public was very interested in the issue of language. Nowadays, not so much. There was another issue that provoked interest of the public. It's the question of the coat of arms with initial white initial field that was used in the fascist puppet state of Croatia during the war. It was a question of legal practice that was in favor of legitimized white initial field because it was part of the Croatian tradition since medieval time. And it was the last year's judgment of High Misdemeanor Court that finally probably put the final legal stone, legitimizing the red-white initial field of the Croatian coat of arms, proclaiming it's not specific for the fascist puppet state of Second World War. And other elements, sorry, other elements that I listed do not have a particular regulation. So, all of that is a bit strange. And we can add something still more strange to that, a reform of the criminal code. In 1997, the offense of reputation of the Republic of Croatia also consisted the part that incriminated offense of the reputation of the Croatian people or ethnic and national communities or minorities living in the Republic of Croatia. That part was erased because, as it was explained, it was part of general regulation of hate speech that incriminates racial, religious, national, ethnic affiliation. So the protection of Croatian people, explicit, and ethnic minority was kicked out of the explicit protection. Something that, again, you perhaps would not expect. Is there any protection of civil national affiliation in the civil law, like it is in the Hungarian Civil Code, as I was informed, thanks to Zoltan? No. No such clauses, no such practices. So, I will conclude this with the conclusion that regulation related to national symbol is kind of conventional, but also sustained, contrary to expectancy, and still accepted by the public, which is a bit strange. Why so? One would expect a different outcome due to tensions, historical experiences, frustration, and so on. I would offer the hypothesis. Having its own national state as the general protector increases feeling of security of the majority. and lower sensitivity of society to infringements that before that it was so sensible. And of course, it results with conformity of coalition government. In Croatia, all governments are coalition governments that do not want to risk anything in, in dealing with sensitive questions. Now let's see briefly about national minorities and religious communities. National minorities are less than 8% in Croatia, 22 of them constitutionally protected. The regulation of national minorities is highly developed, very extensive, on the rights of members of national minority, including symbols, particular language and script. What is the origin of that? It's not autonomous, as you may understand. It was not imposed, but accepted upon the pressure of international community in the process of recognition of Republic of Croatia, where it was conditioned, and accession process to the European Union, with targeted Serbian protection of Serbian minority, because of obvious reasons. So it's very developed, the most developed of all of these issues, according to the heteronomical impact. But, again, surprisingly, it is accepted. So it can be taken as legitimized. Practice is rather good. There are few objections from Serbian minority. One is excessive. The case of Vukovar it is presented in the article, but too complicated to deal with it now. But basically, it's good. Accepted by the majority as well. Now about religious communities. This is the worst part. No regulation in that. It's completely, almost completely absent. Yet, again, not much complaints and problems in practice. Yes, there are some, but not much. There was offensive anti-Catholic theater, there were few offensive anti-Catholic theater performances that produced dissatisfaction and complaints on the side of Catholic Church. There are some marginal atheist groups that complain about Catholic symbols in public spaces, hospitals, prisons, and courts, but this is all very marginal. Both of these criticisms are grounded because they both refer to the unregulated sphere. The problem is unregulation. Yet, that could perhaps be taken as legitimized because there are not so strong opposition in public. There are, but not very essential. So, all of it is absolutely peculiar. I was not expecting this. So let's compare this extensive national minority regulation and unregulated religious sphere of majority. Regulation of national minorities was heteronomical. The unregulated religious symbols is question of autonomous decision. Well, theoretically, the first one is also autonomous, but it was mostly pressure from outside. And it is related to the passivity of governments and political system primarily, but society too. So why? I would say that again, the answer might be national state that served as a general protector, that grants of social and political peace, and that nobody wants to risk social and political disturbances. Not only in governments, that you can understand, but also in society. The outcome is absence, now I'm referring to the religious sphere, absence of rules on certain fundamental values in society. It has obvious short-term benefits, but long-term, probably not. So, the primary responsibility should be, of course, addressed to the government and political elites because they are elected as leaders. But the question is the passivity of society. 86% of Catholics and less than 4 point atheists in Croatia. And the situation as just as I described. And conclusive remarks. State, national, national minority symbols, up to a certain point religious symbols in Croatia, and I would say everywhere in former Yugoslavia, is a story of state and nation building and state and national self-perception. In this case, as a resume, nation-state in Croatian case could be seen as a conflict resolution outcome. The state that is set itself as a principal guarantee of the rights of majority with provision for the rights of national minorities. But it also has a sedation effect. Sedation that unresolved regulatory resolutions of certain fundamental issues in society, primarily religious, are not resolved. Is it irrational? Probably not. So I would say that this is the challenge for answers, for search for answers on this question, for understanding as a basis for action primarily of government, but also discussion on the society. These answers I do not have even as hypotheses. I know that these are complex questions and the answers might be unpredictable.